Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our webinar organized by Topchubashov Center. And my name is Rusif Huseynov, and today we're discussing Iran, the hottest topic right now in the international news. And my guests today are Turkan Bozkurt, an Azerbaijani human rights activist, researcher, and writer based in Canada. She's specializing in human rights violations, gender discrimination, minority rights, particularly regarding South Azerbaijanis in Iran. Welcome to this webinar, Turkan. Great to see you. And we are also very much pleased to host Dr. Murat Aslan, who is a prominent security researcher at the SETA Foundation based in Turkey and an academic at the Hasan Kalyoncu University. Dr. Aslan is recognized for his expertise in international security, defense studies, and intelligence. Murat Bey, welcome to this
Thank you.
Conversation, and thank you very much for your time. As I said in the beginning, we are discussing Iran, which is undergoing probably the most decisive moment in its contemporary history. And the conflict in and around this country may have for the entire Middle East and probably for the global order as well. We're all watching what is unfolding, the subsequent US-Israeli military strikes, the death of the supreme leader, and the power vacuum, which have dramatically accelerated questions that analysts have long deferred. What happens to Iran's ethnic minorities in a moment of state fragility? Switch our attention to a very specific region inside Iran, Northwestern part of the country, which is home to millions of Azerbaijanis and a substantial Kurdish population. And this region sits at the epicenter of these questions. For decades, South Azerbaijanis have faced linguistic discrimination, cultural suppression, and economic marginalization. Kurds in Western Iran carry the memory of crushed autonomy, stretching back to 1946, and they may also be inspired by certain Kurdish political movements in neighboring regions. So the central authority fractures. These long suppressed grievances are acquiring new urgency and new geopolitical relevance. In this very context, of course, as I said, we are focusing on Northwestern region. However, we'll be speaking about the geopolitical issues about Iran as well. What are the Turkan? I'll start with you, and this will be a little bit speculative and provocative question, but I'd like to ask how you see the probabilities of the regime collapse or a new scenario, civil war-like scenario in Iran under the current circumstances. How resilient do you think the Iranian political system remains in the face of external pressure and internal tensions? The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here, and it's great to see Murat Hocam here as well. It's definitely a difficult question to answer right now. Regarding regime collapse, I don't know the answer to that, but I could say that in terms of matter of survival or in terms of matter of durability, these are two different perspectives to look at Iran rather than regime collapse. So even if the central power of Iran is destroyed and there isn't a proper leader in place, even though we know that Khamenei's son Mujtaba is appointed to be the leader, the question remains whether he has the power to keep the country stable and to bring both the Artesh and the Sipah together. And we've also seen recent statements from Western powers, specifically from Donald Trump himself, that he does not recognize Mujtaba as a leader at this point. So we also, I think, need to look at the recent events that's been taking place in the past couple of days, specifically the drone attack in Azerbaijan, in Nakhchivan, and specifically also in Turkey as well. it's really the answer to this question, I think, depends on how you read these events that have taken place, and there are different scenarios or different readings that are done by different analysts and experts. Some read this as retaliatory efforts that Iranian central forces are trying to avenge their leader, are trying to avenge these Western forces. And all these different attacks, whether it's in Dubai, whether it's in UAE or Qatar, or the recent one in Nakhchivan, is all just different groups within the regime doing their best to avenge the leader. But another scenario or another read of these events is that these are actually very much connected. And the reason why these specific different countries are being targeted or hit is to draw them into the conflict, is to draw them into this war, so that it is no longer a Israel-US war against Iran. And the drawing of these different forces could potentially limit the power or the scenario that is the strategies that is put in place by the Western forces. So it's really difficult to say right now whether the regime collapse will happen or not. But stability itself does not seem to be in the near future for Iran. I think that we can say even if a central force appears and does make some sort of agreement with the Western forces to keep the country, to keep the government in place, there, as we'll talk in a bit, and as you mentioned in your intro, that there are specific groups within the country who will not accept a centralized force, will not accept a centralized government that continues to oppress different minority groups. Specifically, also, we'll talk about South Azerbaijanis, we'll talk about Kurds, but there are also other groups that share borders with Pakistan. So the Baluchis or the Al-Ahwazis to the south, these different groups play a very big dynamic into the future of the Iran. And if their rights aren't recognized properly, if their at least some sort of autonomy that they are demanding for their own regional parts aren't recognized or aren't acknowledged in any way, whether if it's in a federal format or a different form of government, this stability would be further away from the Iranian people. We've also seen the involvement of neighboring countries such as Iraq, who have been very much impacted by the Iranian missile attacks in the past couple of days. So we also don't know what the response will be from there. So I don't know if the regime collapse will happen. I'm not sure if there will be a civil war in the coming days, but I can say that this is the weakest point that the Iranian regime has been in its history. And I don't think that the different minority groups who are looking to use this political opportunity to gain regional power, to gain autonomy or some sort of control, will just simply bow down and accept what's happening. But these are all, I would say, conjecture at different points, because as I mentioned, it really depends on how one reads these different scenarios. We also don't know if these retaliations will continue to work, because we know that Iran has 1,200, 1,300 missiles, but they've only used a couple hundred, so that means that they do have about 1,000 still left. Yes, they do have a big amount of missiles, but they don't have missile launchers, which have been strategically targeted by Israel and United States. So there is also a question of, if there is a civil war, if there is some sort of uprising by different ethnic groups, will the government spend their energy and efforts into fighting the Western countries of Israel and United States, or will they change their plans and tactics and try to keep a one united Iran under the current borders? And will Iran target their own people if there is such a civil war, such an uprising? That is also a question that remains to be answered. before I let you take over, I just want to mention the human cost that is often left from these kind of analysis, that is left often between the strategic plans of different governments, that we've seen a very, very large number of people being killed in the last few days, in the last week. And you know that there are some speculations about, whether the school in Minab was hit by Iran themselves, or it was hit accidentally by the Western forces. But I think that it doesn't really matter who hit in terms of human perspective. At the end of the day, we're talking about 150 children, 150 girls between the ages of 9 and 12 that were killed. And we're seeing in Urmia, the city of Urmia and Tabriz, really severely bombed, and we're getting numbers of civilians who are killed. And regardless of who is right or who's wrong, regardless of who wants what, at the end of the day, we see civilians severely negatively impacted by this war.
Oh, very many thanks, Turkan, for this comprehensive introduction, let's put it this way. Before I switch to Dr. Aslan, let me also greet our listeners, and whoever wants to raise a question, please type your topic, type your question in the chat section, and I promise I'll raise this question if our time framework allows. Dr. Aslan, Turkan already has touched upon Iran's strikes against Azerbaijan and Turkey, which created a public outcry not only in these two countries but also internationally. And of course, many speculated about possible retaliation by Baku and Ankara against Iran. But in any case, we are now understanding how this region is entering into a largely uncharted territory now. What do these developments mean for the geopolitics of the Middle East, South Caucasus, and Turkey's strategic environment? The floor is yours, please.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for the invitation, and thank you for the presence of our guests and also the listeners online. First of all, for such a question, I have to remind some conceptual and maybe some approaches per military thinking. I should delineate it, because if you don't understand exactly the background and the logic, I think it will be something lacking in terms of interpreting the overall developments. The first issue is that strategic faults cannot be fixed by tactical moves, and mostly if defense planning is not well calculated, strategic faults start from the very beginning. And in this case, in this war, both the United States, Israel, and also Iran started the action and reaction cycle with strategic faults. And that's why we have to understand the defense planning in terms of its deficiency and sometimes overreactions within that mentality. I said defense planning, why? Well, any country on earth, if they are a state, they must be prepared any sort of escalation, crisis, or any conflict or war or etc. by first having a comprehensive security strategy and per defense policy and defense planning. The United States, for instance, just issued a security strategy paper, as you may know, and the Middle East was at the fourth line as a priority. And today we are discussing not Indochina Sea, but the Middle East. But let me ask if Iran does have a defense planning. Well, they have it, but the scope of it is a bit debatable. Why? Because they have built a plan, a defense plan based on what countering the United States and Israel, totally with a focus on rocket and missile arsenal. And in the meantime, another issue was to harm the US interests, maybe pushing the neighboring Gulf countries or Turkey or Azerbaijan or the other actors as third parties to press the US and Israel partnership? Well, defense planning requires a calculated step, a series of steps. In this sense, you must have the impact assessment. I mean, once you start an action, the reactions should be well calculated to take adequate measures and to have them aligned with your interests. And after that, you can conclude an action plan. And I think that's the missing part in Iranian side right now, up until now. They have a defense planning, poorly regulated, poorly planned, not well coordinated insight, and not based on calculated steps. And think that once you cheer as a victory, once you shoot, for instance, a building or etc., it's nothing. This building serves for what? I mean, if it's a civilian residential building like a skyscraper in Dubai or Doha, or doesn't matter, I mean, it's for nothing. So you can compare the steps of both parties. I mean, I'm not supporting the Israeli cause or the US cause or Iranian cause, but just want to be an objective interpreter of it. Well, another question should be based on if Iran faced a surprise or not. If they fell into a surprise, well, it's then their fallacy. Why? Because the US and Israel threatened Iran a lot of times. There were ongoing diplomatic efforts either in Istanbul or Geneva or Umman, and think that the military option was always circulated as an option, on the table by the US side, or Israelis were threatening. In this sense, there was no surprise. But what was the surprising thing, especially on Iran? Well, it was the first wave of attacks that killed the top 28 decision makers, including Khamenei, because they were at home, sometimes in bunkers, and they did not calculate exactly how it could be efficient to hit these specific targets because of intelligence failure of the Iranians. And think that right after these initial losses, I see that there was a panic on what to do and how to do. Then we can start exactly the answer of your question. The mood of being in a panic requires what? The plan will be reassessed, some steps will be fastened, and the power used will not be appropriate to acquire the desired outcome, and think that the calculations will ignore some sort of actors and factors or dynamics. In this sense, Iranians has lost one thing, it's the center of gravity. Once you go and visit the statements of the American Chief of Staff, General used the center of gravity as a term frequently in his speeches. Why? This is the first rule for a military campaign, either offending or defending. You should care about it. Why? Center of gravity means it's the target that you should focus on with the majority of your forces or capabilities. And now let's discuss the center of gravity issue much more comprehensively, because once Iranians started attacks on the neighboring countries or in the Gulf region, especially targeting Emirates, Qatar, Saudi Arabia's energy facilities, Kuwait, or etc., or Bahrain, well, that was the biggest blow on the strategy side. I mean, it was the essential strategic fault that neither of the statements or narratives or deeds could mend it. I'm not favoring the American side in this calculation because they did also something wrong in this case. It's what they ignored cooperating and coordinating the Gulf region, and in the meantime, they did not reposition their military capabilities in the Gulf, but evacuated it. They evacuated some number of their personnel from the Gulf region. Think that these countries paid a lot to the United States for a long time, maybe decades. And in the very first instance that these countries faced a challenge from Iran, American forces were out, other than the ones directly planned to counter the Iranian threat, but not for the Gulf region, but for protecting the American interests. And Iranians did what? Ignoring such a reality, they attacked all these countries and then they delivered two missiles. One was landed to Syria after it collapsed in the air, another one in the Hatay city of Turkey, and then Azerbaijan. Well, not well calculated and another strategic fault again. Let me tell you why. Now, let me start with the Gulf region. In the Gulf region, I think we have to categorize the countries in two different tiers. The first one is the Emirates, directly cooperating with Israel and the United States. Another one is Qatar. And let me say three tiers, it's much more logical. A gate for Iran to mediate with the other countries, especially the United States, in case there happens something in the region. And Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, and Kuwait, they're on the same league. Well, they are not cooperating with Iran, but they are searching for what a positive climate in the Gulf region. Well, if you attack Emirates and American interests over there, it may have a logic. I don't see a logic though. But what about Qatar? Qatar is the one who mediated a lot, especially between Iran and the others. And also let me remind, Arabic Emirates also mediated with Iran before. So once you attack these countries in the region, you lose your ground, your landscape in terms of diplomatic efforts to stop the escalation. The second thing, well, you may close the strait reaching to Gulf region, but I mean it's different. You may claim that this war is inappropriate, not just, etc., and you can do it because it's within your threats. But destroying, for instance, Saudi energy facilities or targeting the Gulf region's, energy assets, it's something different. So that's why Iranians did something very wrong in terms of targeting the Gulf region. And that's why center of gravity is important. Why? As a former military person, as a retired colonel, I would target the US Navy or Israel because center of gravity requires the hostile assets first. So Iranians did wrong, and I think they can't revert back the time. Another issue is about the methodology they preferred. Rockets and missiles has never been the exact correct means to achieve a victory. Why? Military requires the combination of all forces, Army, Navy, Air Force, space, digital space, etc. If you rely on only missiles, well, you can hit targets but cannot impose your will on the other side. In this sense, the Iranian defense plan heavily relies on what? Having missiles hitting targets. I don't see any logic in this calculation. Then what happens once you hit targets with low accuracy? Let me say they can target an area but not exactly the appropriate point. Well, the US and Israelis are targeting exactly the locations they have identified in their target lists, maybe composed of at least 3,000 to 5,000 ones. Then in each time the US and Israelis deliver an ammunition or sends an, aircraft or UAV, they can hit wherever they want. So this is something not that much balanced for Iranians. So, based on missile attacks, it may be a complementary one, but not the essential means. Why? Because they lost their ground when they withdrew back from Syria. Iraq is another point because the Shias in Iraq, mainly armed militia, are heavily divided. And Lebanon, they can't support it. And Yemenis, they had that contact with the US government. And right after threats, Yemenis did not start a massive attack either to Israel or the other vessels in the Red Sea. In this sense, I think Iranians again miscalculated the political situation, its affiliation to military situation, and think that they also ignored their internal vulnerabilities. In this sense, let me conclude here, not to extend the discussion. First of all, an attack on Turkey will close another gate to reach either the United States or Europe or etc. So that's why Turkey reacted spontaneously. Foreign Minister Fidan called Arakci instantly, and the ambassador of Iranians to Ankara has been called to, foreign ministry at the very same hour. So that means Turkey does have a line that Turkey can't tolerate the misreadings or faults, and if the outcome is much more than expected, there will be no toleration. The second thing, Turkey sees itself as no party to the conflict. Turkey is not providing any support either to the United States or Israel, and the relations with Israel is at the lowest point right now because of Gaza issue. An attack on Turkey by the hands of Iranians is something, inconsistent. And Azerbaijan and Turkey, we have to be aware of one thing. Turkey and Azerbaijan have a pact right now. Turkey assumes responsibility to defend Azerbaijan. It's on the paper. And Azerbaijan is the same. I think that as Iran, ignoring the targets in Israel or the US, you are targeting either Nahchivan, and Turkey is a guarantor state for Nahchivan, please be aware, or Azerbaijan or Turkey. It's nonsense. So I believe that now Iranians are well warned, but I don't know if this panic mood will keep continue, because I'm expecting more from the Iranian side as the second and third phase. And now let me stop here, and then let me have the other question maybe in the coming period. Thank you.
Well, Dr. Aslan, thank you very much for this comprehensive summary of the war thus far. Given your military background, I totally rely on your judgment. And since I do not share the same background with you, and this is why I may see the situation a little bit different. I think as a cornered country, what Iran does may have a certain logic in terms of trying to drag all other countries, as many countries as possible, into this war in order to pressurize the international community, which can come and beg for cessation of hostilities. But now, since we spoke about how the Iranian political and military leadership behaves in these days, I'd like to now get back to what we spoke in the beginning of our conversation, what it could mean and how it can resonate amongst ethnic minorities, different ethnic groups in Iran across the entire country. Turkan, I will go with you now. The history of inter-ethnic relations, including conflicts in northwestern Azerbaijan, which is the province of West Azerbaijan, and how has the Iranian state in different periods, be it under Shah, be it the Islamic regime, used these, and how has the present government utilized or manipulated these inter-ethnic dynamics for its own gains and control? Please.
Thank you. It's when we look at the South Azerbaijani territories in Iran, these inter-ethnic conflicts, like you mentioned, is very much focused in one specific province, and it's the province of West Azerbaijan. The province of West Azerbaijan shares a border with the province of Kurdistan. And I just want to briefly mention that when we go back to right after the fall of the Qajar dynasty and when the Pahlavi dynasty came into power, these inter-ethnic conflicts, where it be in the West Azerbaijani province or other parts of Iran, didn't really exist, or it was very minor. It wasn't in this large scale that we see today. And even when we look at the 1945-46 South Azerbaijani government that was created, we see that under Pishavari, even where the Western Azerbaijani province, specifically the city of Mahabad, was given its own rights, because that city has been predominantly Kurdish speaking and ethnically Kurdish, and they had their own rights, and there are much evidence to show how the Azerbaijanis during 1945, 1946, and the Kurdish groups lived together. They had much connections. They were working together actually against the central forces of the Pahlavi to have their own controls over their lands. Of course, as many of you know, that government was brutally suppressed, and the central forces killed many people in the process from both the Kurdish sides as well as the Azerbaijani side. And we fast forward to 79, when the Shah falls and the Islamic Republic is coming into power. So during this time, I want to mention a very specific incident that took place in the city of Solduz, the Solduz massacre that happened as a result of these interethnic conflicts. And the reason why I specifically bring this example is because as we look at the Kurdish militias that are preparing and ready, and as we see that they have a Western backed support to an extent, as they're gathering their forces, we may see, unfortunately, a similar incident take place not only in the city of Solduz, but due to the Iranian strategies, as I'll speak about in a bit. This conflict has grown not only to that border that West Azerbaijan province and the Kurdistan province share, but it has extended to the city of Urmia. It has extended to even the city of Maku. This in 1979, after the Shah fell, there were specifically the KDPI, the Kurdish Democratic Party of Iran, tried to take control over their own land, and they tried to assert their own dominance in the region. And this unfortunately ended with a lot of killings on both sides, both Azerbaijani side as well as the Kurdish side, although the Kurdish side was predominantly later on, after what's called the Holy War against the Kurdish insurgency that took place from 79 to 80. And this was a response of the IRGC at the moment to keep the stability in the country and to suppress these Kurdish insurgencies. In Solduz specifically, due to these interethnic issues and interethnic conflicts and the expansionist claims of certain Kurdish militias, in Solduz, hundreds of people ended up dying because there was an effort to push the Azerbaijani population out of Solduz. I say Solduz, but Solduz is the Azerbaijani name for that city due to the toponymic changes that takes place in Iran. The name of the city is now Nagadeh, which is taken from its own Aboriginal or indigenous name and changed into a Persian, which is an entire discussion on its own. But the conflict in Suldus ended up killing hundreds of Azerbaijanis and many on the Kurdish side as well. And this is important because while much of the Kurdish militias are armed and supported, the Azerbaijanis and specifically the South Azerbaijani movement have always taken the peaceful, civic, civil side of the control over their lands and try to gain their cultural and linguistic rights through this manner. So the reason why it is called the Suldus massacre is due to this fact of an armed force is trying to push an unarmed force from these cities. So once the control was taken over by the IRGC and the Islamic forces after the 80s, the conflict took a different side, just as we saw in different regions or perspectives, how the Islamic regime continued to push their ideology, continued to push their strategies, but they chose a softer side. They chose a softer form of warfare. So instead of going in with the police or the guns and that kind of really violent form of suppression, they began using migration as well as demographic engineering to move settlements from different parts of the countries. And maps were also redrawn. The name of Azerbaijan was erased from certain places. And when we look at these demographic changes, I want to first of all talk about the incentivized settlements that started taking place in the province of West Azerbaijan. So the Kurdish families in Azerbaijani majority areas, through preferential land allocation or housing subsidies or agricultural support from different parts, these groups began moving into the Western Azerbaijani provinces. And there were also different application of land tenure and property rights as well, even though many Azerbaijanis have lived there for centuries. It began becoming, especially with the modernization and the involvement of different forms of land reforms, many of the agricultural lands were given to the Kurdish groups. And there are also ecological aspects of it where it has helped sort of fasten this migration or fasten this location of different groups. So when we look at Lake Urmia and its destruction or its drought, we see that many Azerbaijani families from near there have had to move to different cities or to different parts of the Persian-dominated cities such as Tehran or just metropolitan areas in general, just so they can be able to find jobs and be able to provide for their families. So when you look at this from a macro level, we see that a lot of movement from the Kurdistani side moving into the Western Azerbaijani province, while at the same time we also see a lot of Azerbaijanis moving out of the Western Azerbaijan province in order to find jobs and be able to support themselves. With all of this in mind, I want to go back to the Suldus example. And the reason why I say this Suldus example may be able to repeat itself is because a lot of people are worried and a lot of people are, they remember this. This didn't happen centuries ago. This was 47 years ago. So a lot of people are still alive. They remember this. Their parents remember this. So there is a serious worry on the side of South Azerbaijanis in the West Azerbaijan province that similar things might repeat. And these expansionist claims that have been put forward by the Kurdish militias, and I really want to emphasize here that when I talk about these acts, I'm specifically talking about the Kurdish militias, whether if it's the PJAK or Kamala. I'm not talking about the civilian Kurdish groups who live within Azerbaijani territories, and they themselves might ethnically be Kurdish, but in terms of nationality, they are a South Azerbaijani who live there. And we see these claims now past the territory of Suldus, or the cities that are specific to the Iran and Iraq border, and move way north to the city of Baku. So city of Baku is probably one of the most important cities for not only South Azerbaijan, but for the West Azerbaijan province in general, because it is the corner that we share border not only with the Azerbaijani government, the Republic of Azerbaijan, but also with Turkey, and we have a border there. And there have been verified data that's coming out of that border that the PEJAK or the PJAK have been preparing and have been settling there since 2006, that have been in part in support of Islamic regime to limit what the South Azerbaijanis can do, because as the Republic of Azerbaijan started becoming stronger in the north, there were these worries that there might be a support from the north to the south in terms of political or economics, and this might give ideas into South Azerbaijanis that it's time for us to gain control over our land. And another aspect of this is, of course, the Turkish aspect, which I'm sure Murat will talk about more in detail, but the Kurds that live on that border are they're worries by the Iranian government that the Kurds in Turkey and also in Iran might collaborate or might support each other, that would lead to further retaliations or land loss in terms of the Iranian side. So with all of this happening, and as we see instability taken over Iranian government and Iranian lands, there are these questions that have been arising in the minds of many South Azerbaijanis who are worried of what might this bring, especially after the I believe it was February 22nd of this year, when 5 major Iranian Kurdish parties formally established the coalition of political forces of Iranian Kurdistan. These are the founder members are PDKI, the PAK, the PJAK, and PEJAK specifically, as we call it, is very important because PEJAK by the Turkish Republic and the United States Treasury Department have been named a terrorist group. So they're not just armed militias, but they're groups that have been openly by major countries in the world, major governments, been labeled as terrorists. And as we look at what has happened previously, or not previously, actually very much recently in Syria, to the different groups there, this template, if you might say, the Syrian template, shows us that the YPG did not wait for a census, did not ask what's happening, or did not ask for the permission or the consent of the local groups, because those regions are also not those regions are also not completely Kurdish. There were different ethnic groups that also lived there, but it didn't matter. They moved in, Afrin, Kobani, and they were able to negotiate, and the demographics there were irrelevant. It was a matter of military presence and the external political sponsorship and everything. So we see a very similar development in the Western Azerbaijan province in Iran, specifically at the border. We've seen the clashes that have taken place on the Iraqi border in the past couple of days, where Iran has been attacking the Komala forces there, and we have also heard news from the inside, directly from our sources in the ground, that for instance, we've heard from our groups on the ground that the certain cities at the border have been evacuated. So Marwan is one of those cities that's located at the border and is about 1 hour difference from Suldus. So it's not very far. And if the Kurdish militias at the border were to enter through Marwan and make their way through their claimed so-called Kurdish territories, it's unfortunate that we may be able to see similar events to Soldos, and we don't really think that if there is a civil war, if the IRGC is unable to protect its power or control over the regions, such atrocities might take place again.
Well, Turkan, thank you so much. I was about to ask you a follow-up question about what kind of scenarios could await us, but you already covered this in this comprehensive answer of yours. Dr. Aslan, Turkey is not a party to this conflict. It was your words some minutes ago. However, if a certain scenario, which many analysts are now predicting or warning for, such as potential Kurdish incursion into Iran, let's say from Iraq, what and given Ankara's own traumas and past experience, be it the Turkish soil, be it Syria or Iraq, what could be Ankara's main concerns and priorities in such a scenario?
Okay. First, Turkey pursues a new sort of foreign policy, which is based on fight and talk. And the second pillar is strategic passions, because once Turkey starts something, Turkey plays for the conditions, timing, and then pursues a policy directly fit with the realities of the region. That's why in Syria, Turkey had to wait like 8 years. Right after Turkey faced that trauma in 2016, it was the Gulenist coup d'etat attempt. Well, if something happens in Iran, so what could be the Turkish foreign policy or how Turkey can engage with the region, etc.? The first thing, as a pillar, Turkey defers Kurds with the terrorism. I mean, Kurds are reality of the geography. They are all our brothers and sisters, either in Turkey or Iraq or Syria or Iran, doesn't matter. But if there's a terror threat, I think we should differentiate it. I mean, if you blame all Kurds on doing something in the frame of terrorism, secessionism, or etc., well, it's not fair. First, let me tell this reality. Second thing, Turkey is another pillar, especially in foreign policy, is not being a revisionist country, especially in challenging the borders of the others. In this sense, think that Turkey had a great advantage in Syria, but did not change the border. Turkey insisted on the integrity of Syria, integrity of Iraq, even though there were a lot intervening factors, like the US presence, for instance, in Syria, together with Russia and Iran. And think that for a long time, the West intervened in Iraq during the Saddam era at the up north, and Turkey was against dividing Iraq. Why? Because Turkey believes that if there happens a change in the borders, it will have a domino effect. For instance, regarding Iran, if something happens in Iran, like a collapse, ethnic warfare, etc., expect Pakistan and Iraq to be divided. Baluchis in Pakistan are much more inclined to build an autonomous region or an independent country for themselves, together with the ones in Iran. And the tribal structure best fit this formation because, for instance, there are 3 organizations, 2 in Iran and 1 in Pakistan, of Baluchis, Jaisal Adil and Ansar al-Furqan, and also Liberation Front of Baluchis in Pakistan, and they are all well connected. I mean, cross-border connection is very important in here. Now let's take Kurds, per your question. First of all, the Iranian political coalition formed by Kurds 2 or 3 days ago, I think 3 days ago, well, it's a step to build a formation, but please, let's be careful. There are 5 organizations under this coalition, and 2 of them, 2 other Kurdish organizations, refused to join. Why? Because of not including the Marxist icons or symbols and also sentiments or narratives in the coalition statement. Even though PJAK, the sister organization of PKK, is Marxist, well, the others are extreme and much more inclined to obey the ideological aspect of the quest and think that they all are competing. Now, another reality is about what Iraq and Iran. I mean, they do have linkages between the political parties, tribes, or etc. at both sides of the border. KDP, Kurdistan Democrat Party, is not favoring a Kurdish inclusion in Iran at the expense of another country or to favor another country, I mean Israel or the United States. PUK, Pakistan, party of, this Union Party of Kurdistan. Well, Talabani brothers are in charge. Bafel Talabani is really aggressive. And in terms of psychology, he needs treatment because he has great ups and great downs in the meantime, maybe 5 seconds after. He had American uniform negotiating with Iranians, danced with Irans with the American uniform, BDU, and think that he used PKK to counter KDP in Iraq, at the north of Iraq. And PKK was reliant on the support of PUK, Talabani brothers, maybe to have a leverage in Iraq. And that's why PKK attacked several times. The most important one was in Ahmedia several years ago. They targeted a Peshmerga checkpoint and they killed 3 Peshmergas of Barzani. So, in this fragmented nature, what Talabani brothers and PKK could do is to refrain from being included in Iran, but use, again, another PYD, YPG type solution. It's what? They can build a coalition like the one we have witnessed, an organization with a different name. Rather than directly being involved, they can use this organization as an entity of themselves, by the way, to be in Iran. Well, it's a danger. It's a danger. Why? Once you start an ethnic conflict in any part of Iran, expect similar things in the other parts. And second thing, Iranians do have a great message organization and revolutionary guards. Well, they are well prepared for any internal uprising, and the current attack of the United States and Israel, it's an aerial campaign, an intelligence operation. Once you want to start something like this, you have to include your special forces first. And second thing, there must be a unit on the ground coordinating everything. In this sense, if Israel and the United States continues the campaign as it is, I don't expect the Kurds have courage to start an uprising. If they see the American flag together with them, as they did during the Syria campaign, they can do it. Another issue is about what? This is about, again, the Turkish policy. There must be no adventure and no provocation, but first observe, understand, and then decide. Actually, it's in strategy-making literature of international politics. In this sense, I believe that Turkey is much more close to prevent the threats first, observe the developments second. Once Turkey sees an existential threat, Turkey will not hesitate. Why? Because there's a lessons learned from the Syria case. Once Turkey was a passive defender of the country, they were planning to build a sort of corridor linking the east of Euphrates River, linking to Afrin and then the Mediterranean Sea. And that's why Turkey, faced great challenges in 2012, 2013, 14, 2015, and 2016 because of both Gulenists and PKK. Well, Iran, if it collapses, similar threats will occur over there. And for sure, South Azerbaijanis are not alone, and also Turkey is favoring a solution that will protect all the minorities, including South Azerbaijanis, but please don't forget the others. What about the ones at the very south of Hazar Sea, Caspian Sea? Well, they are not South Azerbaijani, but they are from the Caucasus region with a different language and different culture. What about nomads? They are pure Turkish. What about Afshars? They are pure Turkish. So once you observe the overall Iran, a collapse will endanger many minor ethnicities with existential threats like evaporations. Why? Basij is over there. And once you start it, you must be aware that this will create a chaos inside the country. And think that at the very beginning of this campaign, Trump and Netanyahu called for an uprising in the streets of Iran because it will ease the military campaign. I mean, that's crystal clear. But what about the impact assessment? If thousands, hundreds of thousands are somehow massacred, what will happen? I mean, just for the cause of Israel and the United States, you can't sacrifice hundreds of thousands like it happened in Iraq or Syria. I'm talking about 800,000 people killed either in Iraq or either in Syria. 1.4 million were displaced and include, the others as refugees. I mean, not only about killing. So that's why we must have projections on what happened, what's happening, and what could happen. If you start one act earlier, it will be devastated by the opposing party, either the United States, Israel, or Iran. If you start something imaginative, that means far from realities, it will collapse. But timing, but the maturation of all dynamics is important in here. And also, you should care the third parties as a concluding remark. Russia and China. First of all, I was expecting more, especially from China. Why? They have lost the ground in Venezuela. Now they are paying commission to the US companies or to the US government. Iran is another source for oil and gas, which is the most maybe on the globe, maybe third or fifth, I don't know. And think that once China lose in Iran, they will pay more to the US economy. US economy does have a deficit like $1.2 trillion every year, and it will be China financing to fill this gap. So I was expecting China at least to stand much more firm in favor of Iran, but it didn't happen. What about Russia? Iran provided weapons and ammunition to Russia against Ukraine. And now the statements are much more rhetoric, but not solid. In this sense, Iranians must have a lessons learned. Iranians, rather than extending diplomatic discussions to gain much more time, I think should learn how to conclude an agreement. And then we can discuss what will happen. If they don't, expect what? A collapse of something. A collapse of either a government, and Iranians do have a dual system, a collapse of a regime or a collapse of a state. Collapse of a government is far too vague. Why? Pezeshkian is actually not radical. Collapse of regime is painful, and collapse of state is much more painful. In this sense, if there's a collapse of state, either Azerbaijan or Turkey should protect all the Turks and other minorities, including Kurds maybe, against any aggression. If it's a regime collapse, well, Turkey and Azerbaijan should watch the situation, once Iranians harms the minorities, there must be a coordinated effort. But please, in this scenario, Israel is one of the important spoiler. Why? Turkish-Israeli relations is at the worst level in history right now because of Gaza. And as of yesterday, they announced another thing. They are banning the access of Muslims to Masjid al-Aqsa and also Christians to the holy church sites. Think that if this war becomes a religiously inspired one, well, it will be a region and also global-wide or religion-wide escalation. So it's a danger. I think the US should decide on one thing. They should stop first Israel. I mean, inclusion of Israel to this game is really dangerous. And if they want to resolve the issue, they can talk. They may decide on a change. I don't know at what level or degree, but not with Israel. It's a danger. Thank you so much. So let me stop here.
Dr. Aslan, thank you very much. Both you and Turkan, when we spoke before the webinar, we agreed to conclude our discussion within 1 hour, the time framework, and this is why I want to stick to this timeline, just in case the audience who has been so generous by spending their time with us, if there is any question from our listeners, we can actually collect 1 or 2 maximum and extend our discussion for another 10 or 15 minutes. But unless there is any other topic from our listeners, then let me ask each of you, Turkan and Dr. Aslan, to have your conclusions as your final remarks for 3-5 minutes max. Turkan, let's start with you.
Thank you very much. I just want to briefly talk about how dividing the different ethnic groups or different minorities within Iran has served the Iranian regime very well, and how today actually one of the reasons why we're so afraid of not a sudden collapse, but an emergence of civil war actually benefits the Iranian regime, because many groups who are unarmed or many civilians are sort of stuck in between these two forces, or let's say the Iranian regime and the Israeli and United States, and how it's often these civilians who pay the price for bigger problems or bigger strategies that they don't really have control over. And when we look at the South Azerbaijanis, because I don't think I'm qualified to speak on behalf of other minorities, but I can speak about the South Azerbaijanis, that when we look at our movement, because it has been so culturally focused and because it has been so peaceful in a lot of different ways, we see that actually there's no dominant political force amongst each other now, whether if it's inside the country or in the diaspora. And a part of this has also been optimistic thinking, where as Azerbaijanis and as Turks, we've relied so much on the Republic of Azerbaijan and the Turkish Republic without really thinking about the overall legal frameworks and the political dynamics that exist. It's not as easy as some might think for help from other places to come, as Professor Murat has really well explained before in the case of Syria, that each country must first and foremost protect themselves. And I think the similar will also start taking place among South Azerbaijanis themselves, based on how I see and analyze the responses that have been coming from different political parties that operate in the diaspora or from the inside. And in some ways, this might have been a wake-up call for South Azerbaijanis, and I think that's a really good thing. But at the same time, the political arrangement that follows a potential fall of the Islamic regime, or even if the Islamic regime remains as is, there must be reform, because otherwise there is this civil war, civil collapse will follow, regardless of if someone or some party takes control and keeps a centralized force. So regardless of what happens in the next few weeks and whether the war stops or continues, I think it's certain to say that Iran will completely change. It will not remain the same. And these different minority groups that we spoke about, whether if it's the South Azerbaijanis or Turks in general, like Murat said, there are Turks in the south, there are Turkmens to the east, there are also Baluchis, there are Al-Ahwazis who have also been very particular about their demands, about their the right of self-determination, and of course the different Kurdish groups that we talked about. So when we look at the claims to throne from the Pahlavi, or we look at the claims from MEK, the Mujahideen Khalq, I think the reappearing question, or the reappearing conclusion, actually, not the question, the reappearing conclusion is that Iranians will not accept another form of centralist and very a theocracy to continue. So I think we'll see great reforms or great changes in these two aspects. One being a change in theocratic nature of the government, and another change will be how Iran will approach these two how Iranian government will approach the rights of ethnic and national minorities. And I hope that not just South Azerbaijanis, every single person who is impacted by this conflict will see better days in the future.
Thank you very much, Turkan. Dr. Aslan, your closing remarks to summarize Iran's Middle Eastern geopolitics, Iran's geopolitics, and the role of ethnic groups inside of this. 4 or 5 minutes maximum, please.
Okay, thank you. I will cut it short, very short sentences, but I created a categorization on my paper, so let me just try to stick with it. First of all, let me remind the societal aspect. Now, we see that Iranians are good examples. Religion is not a glue to be a strong state, but it's actually vulnerability. So that's why I think Iran should review exactly what sort of country they want. I mean, once you are failing, the ethnicities are forming up another identity. So identity should be important, and Iranians had a fault in this. Second thing is about the international organizations, I would say. Diversity and toleration are the fundamentals of the UN system, and there was only one meeting of the Security Council, and nobody talked about it, not in the media. And think that the UN is currently not functioning to prevent this war, because the rule of law is replaced by rule of power. So I would suggest, as a concluding remark, in this sense, the UN should not be replaced by a peace council or peace committee or peace board or etc. And UN must be much more inclusive and be reformed in terms of decision making, financial issues, and many more fields that UN requires. In terms of military, still we are at the very early stage of this issue, this war. And the Americans announced that they concluded the first phase. I respect the military planning, no problem. But Iran is well prepared on one thing. They first used Shahid drones, not to be detected well by radars, and then rockets with low speeds, and only limited amount of precise high-speed or hypersonic missiles. Now, expect what? The intensity will decrease from the US side and Israeli side as far as they consume the ammunition, but the density of attacks from the Iranian side may increase. And that's why this ethnic option for Israelis and the United States, well, it's much more circulated right now. Another issue regarding military is the nuclear issue. Well, we know that Iranians produce 60% of uranium, enriched uranium. Maybe I know this issue for more than a decade. I don't know exactly what they have, but I have to, emphasize one thing. Nuclear is for energy. I accept it. And Turkey welcomes it, by the way, but nuclear for weapons, not acceptable. So we must come to the least terms that nuclear weaponing, arming should not be on the agenda of the region, including Israel. I had a classmate in the United States from Israeli army, and he claimed that they have 400, and we know that it's widely circulated that they have 250 nuclear warheads. Doesn't matter, even a single one is more than expected. So that's why there must be a complete nuclear de-armament procedure. On the other hand, we know that INS is removed, not valid anymore, and all countries are searching ways to acquire nuclear weapons. It will start a new security dilemma then, and sometimes security trilemma in literature. So nuclear issues should be cared in terms of military and also energy. Attacking energy resources is a fault for Iran. Once you cause and global inflation, you can't justify why you are fighting. Why? Every conflict starts with a reasoning. Each time you start it, it becomes something different, maybe different from the initial cause. That's why energy and economy should not be endangered. If I'm a citizen and if I'm paying $100 more on monthly budgeting to gasoline, well, I will blame Iranians, or I will blame Israelis or the United States. So it's important. I mean, energy and economy, especially for the countries like Japan, Singapore, or Southeast Asia, they are dependent on the energy resources of the region, and they have nothing to do with Iranians or Israelis. So that's why there must be a mechanism like the grain corridor of Russian-Ukraine war, that energy resources should be delivered to the markets much more safer. And finally, politics, that's important. And that will be the last thing I have to emphasize. Currently, foreign policy is much more blended with internal politics. There's a difference between being a state and government. Government, well, they are representing a political idea and maybe involved in politics, no problem. But state is different. State is continuity. Think that in the United States or in Israel, sometimes other countries, doesn't matter. They blend politics to, at least to have an advantage. They escalate military, they escalate foreign policy for the cause of internal politics. Think that we were discussing ACE in the United States, Epstein folder, and now nobody's talking about it. What about the punch, the monkey in Japan? I think that it's a psychological warfare. Everybody was talking about the punch with a toy, I believe that the politics should be excluded in designating the military campaigns or foreign policy, and that's the actually shortfall. Thank you so much.
Dr. Aslan, thank you very much, especially for categorizing these interesting subtopics. Distinguished speakers and guests, the Iran conflict is so much multi-layered and multidimensional that each of these topics would require hours of discussions. We try to touch upon a few of these aspects, a little bit of geopolitics, a little bit of interethnic dynamics. And I thank you, both Turkan and Dr. Aslan, for your valuable contributions. I thank you, dear listeners, for your patience. I really hope we'll be able to get together again and discuss similar other topics sometime soon. So thank you very much, and have a great day or afternoon ahead.